But I'd like to introduce Dr. Greg Jones, who's an assistant professor of theology here at Valpo, and also founding pastor of Union Community Church here in Valparaiso, and who knows very much about the particulars of the conversations that happened. He's the coordinator of the Valparaiso Diversity Network Association and a member of the board of directors for Project Neighbors. His talk is about the social impact of migrations into the Calumet communities, cultural communities in the Calumet region. So, Dr. Jones.
Okay, I know our time is slipping by, so I'm going to pass out two documents to you. One is a, good friend of mine, Larry Voss, is providing a bias-motivated incidents report in Northwest Indiana. And this goes from November the 1st, 1990 to October 1st, 2004. You actually see the list out of the bias incidents that have happened that are racially related. We have an organization on campus called the Community Outreach Partnership Center that provides data in terms of the actual incidents that takes place, whether it's a swastika, a Molotov cocktail, or whatever it might be. I'm going to pass that out to you. He did an updated version of that with news articles, bias-motivated incidents in Northwest Indiana from 1990 to 2010. So you'll see one goes to 2004, and then it picks up from 2004 to 2010, basically to 2010. Basically covers the Northwest Indiana or Calumet region.
And we have 20 of each, so maybe we can do a little sharing out there as I pass these out.
I'm going to try to move quickly through this. The first thing that we need to do, as many of my local friends use a colloquial, we don't need to get it twisted. The land, what that means is don't get it confused. The land originally belonged to Native American ethnic communities, basically indigenous communities. The Miami, the Illinois, and the Shawnee were one such group. We also want to take advantage of understanding that the Potawatomi was also part of the Northwest Indiana community, or the Calumet region, and they were, all these groups were forcibly moved off of this land. This land was basically taken from them. The Potawatomi hunted the region and established a number of trails, including the Old Sauk, the Calumet, the Tulsa, and the Calumet River. With the arrival of the French, the trails provided a transportation corridor for the fur trade and were major transportation routes. Settlers entered the Lake County following treaties with the Native Americans. They broke those treaties. They arrived from New York, Ohio, and southern Indiana, and they squatted on the land in the current towns of Crown Point, Hobart, Cedar Lake, and others that we would see in the Northwest area. The people of the region, I'm going to move through this quickly because I want to get to the point that that's germane to the social impact of cultural immigrants into the area. And this is the area that we're talking about. Basically, we're looking at this particular area. This is kind of a bad map, but we're talking about the area that comes down out of Illinois into East Chicago, Hammond, Gary, along the lakefront, New Buffalo, Michigan City. The area that we're going to concentrate on today is going to be basically the East Chicago, Hammond, Gary, Michigan City, Maryville, Valparaiso area. After 1920, the population shift began as the Calumet developed large and varied sections devoted entirely to residential development services. The trend accelerated dramatically after World War II. By 1970, the decline in employment in the steel industry slowed down and even halted population growth in the region. Many old industrial areas such as East Chicago, Hammond, Harvard, South Chicago, and Chicago Heights and Gary attracted minority residents. You also need to understand that minority residents that were invited in were used as labor union busters. In other words, both African Americans and Hispanics were used to break unions, and so that's how they get populated into company towns, what we would call company towns. This is just the region itself comprises a picture of the region itself. The railroad lines also were very, very prolific in the Chicago area because Chicago was the industrial transportation hub, and so they actually would, from the west and from, we would get cattle. We had the old stockyards. I remember as a youth smelling the stockyards. People still worked at the stockyards when I lived in Chicago, and so. But the region that we're talking about is Lake Porter, LaPorte, Newton, Jasper counties in Indiana. And then in the Chicago metropolitan area, we see the South Chicago area. The region's largest city is Gary, and other municipalities that we'll be looking at is Crown Point, Dyer, East Chicago, Griffith, Hammond, Highland, Hobart, Maryville, Michigan City, Munster, Portage, Cherville, and Valparaiso. Now, that's just a picture of the United States Steel, Gary Steel Works, which is very, very important to the Midwest region, especially the industrial corridor. The post-World War I period was one of the growth for Gary, which had almost instantly become the largest city in the Calumet region. We see some of the massive kind of structures that were taking place: the Gary Hotel, the Gary State Bank, the Knights of Columbus Hall, the City Methodist Church. Public structures included Gary City Hall, Gleason Park. Gary became known as the Magic City and the City of the Century. It was the stop that, for example, Marcus Garvey would take in the Midwest. Many of his workers were in the Gary area, and he was very well organized in the Gary area. Although large numbers of African Americans were drawn to the city in search of unskilled labor, so you have to understand during the turn of the century there was what we call a black migration. Actually, it was two, and it was blacks moving from the south, avoiding domestic violence, domestic terrorism, and moving to the north seeking jobs. They moved into these areas, utilized basically as an unskilled labor force and strike breakers. The quota system kept the workforce at no more than 50%, and most of the region was segregated public facilities. Housing was racially segregated. African Americans were relegated to live in what was early called the patch. The patch was the area where blacks were put in, and the derivatives of the patch today are Delaney, Ivanhoe kind of housing complex, and so the legacy in terms of the restriction and segregated communities still exists in the Gary community. According to the 2000 census, 250,349 people 25 years of age and over were high school graduates and had post-high school education. This amount represented 80%, 80% of the Lake County's 25 and over population. For the 25 years of age and over population, 50,000 or 16.2% of four-year college graduates or higher, ranking Lake County 21st highest among Indiana counties for percentage of its population. In 2007, 4,895 persons graduated high school and 4,241, or 86.6%, intended to go on to higher education. Lake County's estimated average unemployment rate for 2009 was 10.4% above Indiana's annual average of 10.1%. The county's unemployment rate was based on the estimated average residential labor force of 225,454. Of that labor force, about 201,000 were employed, 23,000 were unemployed. Lake County's unemployment rate reached a decade low of 3.6% in 2000. The rate rose to 10.4% by 2009. Okay, here's some Hispanic historical information, and this is very important to what we're talking about here today. In 2000, the population of Northwest Indiana was 29.6% minority. Those persons other than whites, white non-Hispanics. The minority population of the region varied from 39.4% in the Lake and 15.2% in LaPorte to 7.8% in Porter. The examining population by race of the region was 75.3% white, 18.2% black or African American, and 1.1% Asian, American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Island. 3.7% other, and 1.7% two or more races. The multi-race category of two or more was first tabulated in the 2000 census. Persons of Hispanic origin who may be of any race accounted for 9.4% of the population. Now I want you to come down to the last paragraph here where it says Hispanics represented 12.2% of the population of Lake. In 1990, more than half of all Hispanics in Indiana lived in Northwest Indiana. This proportion dropped to 1/3 by 2000, despite the 1990 to 2000 growth of the region's Hispanic population to 69,609, or 39%. The Hispanic population, which was concentrated over 90% in Lake County in 1990, had dispersed through the region by 2000, with 84.9% in Lake, 10.2% in Porter, and 4.9% in LaPorte. So they moved along the lake. They were mainly concentrated in Lake County, and then in a 10-year span, they began to matriculate into the other areas of the Lake County area, or the Calumet Region area. They're also moving into the interior of Indiana, and that causes for some significant problems. The social impact of migrations of people of color in the industrialized region. Although most Latino and African Americans was used as strike breakers and periodic labor force in the steel boom of the area, they were always forced to live in segregated urban areas with little opportunity to expand into the region as a legitimate cultural community. Ku Klux Klan and white supremacist activity were increased as the labor force grew and the Klan was used as regulators to the region. Domestic terrorism activity employed actual intimidation and emotional tactics to the removal of active cultural developmental structures to create an ongoing instability in the cultural communities impacted. This impacted Hispanics less because Hispanics have a Catholic origin and they were bilingual and they brought cultural affinity with them, so they were able to stay together more. And so there was less degradation of the Hispanic community because they were very, very strong. But in the African American community, there was significant erosion in terms of institutions. Institutions were basically eroded or dismantled. Periodic terrorist events were done to motivate the cultural communities to stay within the pre-established boundaries set by the planners of the region. Those boundaries, as I have shown you, I'm going to show you again. Hate crime activity is something that is used. It's basically what you do is you use hate crime as a filler, and what you do is you do not want to necessarily show an overt kind of destructive behavior toward those that you hate. What you want to do is cause an uneasiness, a sense of lack of equilibrium, or what you want to do is you want people to feel uncomfortable or unwelcome in the area. And this is consistently done to marginalize those individuals who participated in these restricted areas. Okay, I was in Valparaiso, say maybe about 15 years ago, when we had a rally with the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan just last year dropped flyers in the Wheeler community. Essentially, the flyer was not a very bad flyer. It wasn't, it wasn't something that had, it was just one that said, if you're a Christian and you like your home the way it is, you need to consider resisting this move of Hispanics and African Americans and people of color into the region. Social impacts to the cultural community. Basically, minorities were forced to remain in the Lake County area as a way to restrict their migration into the interior of the state. Please note that most of the cultural spread is along the lakefront. A notable exception is the LaPorte County area that reflects the early labor brokering to have unskilled workers connected to Michigan City industrial corridors thrust in the Calumet region. So when you go to Michigan City, what you see is you see a community of folk who essentially have been set there. They sit back. They actually marked by the cooling tower. The cooling tower is basically behind that neighborhood. It's a very poor neighborhood there. A very good friend of mine named Becky Williams started a cultural organization called Hope, helping our people excel, sit right in the midst of that community. She bought a school for $1, but that's a very poor community, and it's set and it's restricted. Those individuals cannot move outside of that neighborhood. What happens is, and here, I have it here for you. This is where we're talking about. So what we're talking about is we're talking about the development of a restricted corridor of housing and or people of color community basically around here, aside from the lakefront property, because as we find out in Chicago, we know in Chicago, lakefront property is valuable. So the reason why people were moved out of Robert Taylor homes, for example, is because they were too close to the lakefront property, and all for Dearborn Homes, all that area there is lakefront property, and the city has plans for that lakefront property. It's very valuable property. So what they did was disperse people into the suburbs and move them out of the area with scattered site housing so they can hold on to their property. So you have some interesting changes. Burns Harbor, Dune Acres, Beverly Shores are held, and they are boundaried. And so the same people that hold on to those areas in those lakefront properties are the same people who are restricting folks in the East Chicago, Calumet City, Hammond, Gary, Lake Station, and Michigan City areas. Okay. You still with me? Okay. Social and cultural divide. The social and cultural tensions divide among the lines of certain cities. To the east, the boundary is Gary, Indiana. To the south is Valparaiso, Indiana. Valparaiso is in contention now. What we're struggling with now, thank you for the article, what we're struggling for now is the issue of how do we remain diverse, or how do we become diverse and be welcoming to folk. But the fact of it is that Lake County individuals who want to be vendors in Porter County, who want to be vendors in LaPorte County, Jasper County, Newton County cannot develop a relationship entrepreneurial, cannot create institutions, cannot develop communication so that they can sell wares and develop and evolve themselves in terms of cultural community.